house stood at the end of Maple Grove, like a monument to another century. 3 stories of weathered Victorian elegance, wrapped in peeling paint the colour of old bone. The for sale sign had been there so long, the post had rotted through at the base, leaning at an angle that made it look like the house itself was trying to push potential buyers away. Emma Harrison stood on the cracked sidewalk, her hand shielding her eyes from the late afternoon sun, studying the turret windows that caught the light like cataracts in an old man's eyes. Her husband David was already at the front gate, running his contractor's hands along the wrought iron, testing for rust. "It's perfect," he said, not looking back at her. Emma wasn't sure perfect was the word. Imposing, maybe. Haunting, definitely. But they'd been searching for 8 months, and everything in their price range had been either a teardown or a money pit. This house was both, probably, but it had something the others didn't. Character. That's what the realtor had called it when she'd first shown them the listing. Tons of character, she'd said, which Emma had learned was code for problems you haven't imagined yet. The realtor was waiting on the porch now, a woman named Patricia Vance, who wore too much perfume and smiled with too many teeth. She waved as they approached, her heels clicking on the wooden steps that groaned under her weight. "The Harrisons! Right on time!" Patricia's voice had that practiced cheerfulness that made Emma think of flight attendants announcing delays. "I think you're going to fall in love with this place. It's been in the Stone family since 1952. Colonel Archibald Stone built it himself after he came back from Korea." "Colonel?" David's interest perked up. He'd done 4 years in the army before the contracting business, and military history was one of those subjects that could keep him talking through dinner. "Decorated veteran," Patricia said, unlocking the front door with a key that looked older than Emma. "Served in Korea, Vietnam, and apparently some classified operations during the Cold War. Very distinguished man. Lived here alone for the last 30 years, after his wife passed." The door swung open with a sound like a sigh, and the smell hit them immediately. Not decay, exactly. More like time itself had settled into the walls and gone stale. Dust and old wood and something else Emma couldn't quite place. Something metallic. The foyer was cavernous, with a staircase that curved up into shadow. The wallpaper was a faded pattern of roses that might have been burgundy once, but had faded to the colour of dried blood. A chandelier hung from the ceiling, half its crystals missing, the others coated in dust so thick they looked frosted. "Original hardwood throughout," Patricia was saying, her voice echoing. 12-foot ceilings on the first floor, 10 on the second. The third floor is mostly storage, and there's an attic access, but what? Emma asked. Patricia's smile flickered, just for a second, but Emma caught it. "Well, there's a clause in the sale contract. The attic is to remain sealed. It was one of Colonel Stone's stipulations before he passed. His estate lawyer was very specific about it." David had already moved past them, running his hand along the banister, testing the give in the floorboards. "Sealed? What's up there? Personal effects, I assume. Military documents, perhaps." The lawyer didn't specify, but the price reflects the inconvenience. "You're getting the house for $200,000 below market value because of that clause and a few other quirks." Emma and David exchanged a look. 200,000 below market was the difference between possible and impossible for them. "Can we see the rest?" Emma asked. The tour took an hour. 12 rooms, 4 bathrooms, a kitchen that hadn't been updated since Eisenhower, and a basement that made Emma think of serial killers. But the bones were good. David kept saying it. Good bones. The foundation was solid. The roof needed work, but wasn't catastrophic. The plumbing was ancient but functional. And the price? God, The price. They were standing in the master bedroom on the second floor when Emma noticed the door. It was at the end of the hallway, painted the same dingy white as all the others, but there was something different about it, something that made her stop and stare. "That's the attic access," Patricia said, following Emma's gaze. "As I mentioned, it's to remain sealed per the contract terms." Emma walked closer. The door had a deadbolt, and above that, a padlock, and above that, what looked like a sliding bolt lock. 3 separate locks on a door inside a house. "Why so many locks?" she asked. Patricia's smile was back, but it didn't reach her eyes. Colonel Stone was very particular about his privacy. I'm sure it's just old military habits, security consciousness and all that. David had joined them now, studying the door with the same intensity he'd given the foundation. What happens if we need to access it? Structural issues, roof leaks. The contract stipulates that any necessary repairs to the attic space will be handled by the estate's designated contractor at no cost to you. You'll never need to go up there. Patricia checked her watch. "I have another showing in 40 minutes. Should we discuss an offer?" They made the offer that night. Full asking price, no contingencies except the standard inspection. The house was too good to risk losing over negotiations. Patricia called back in 2 hours. The estate had accepted. Closing was set for 30 days. Emma couldn't sleep that night. She kept thinking about the door. 3 locks on the inside of a house, keeping people out or something in. David snored beside her, already dreaming of renovations and resale value. But Emma stared at the ceiling and wondered what kind of man puts 3 locks on an attic door. The kind of man who has something to hide, she thought, or something to protect. The inspection happened on a Tuesday. A man named Frank Delgado, who'd been inspecting houses since before Emma was born. He spent 6 hours going through every inch of the property, his flashlight probing into crawl spaces, and his moisture meter pressed against walls like a doctor checking for a heartbeat. Emma and David followed him around, taking notes, asking questions. Frank had the weathered face of someone who'd seen every possible way a house could fail, and his answers were delivered in a monotone that suggested he'd given up being surprised decades ago. Foundation solid. Roof needs replacing in the next 5 years. Electrical is a nightmare. Probably original wiring. You'll want to update that before you move in. Plumbing's old but functional. HVAC system is from the Nixon administration. Replace it. They were standing in the kitchen when Emma asked, "What about the attic?" Frank looked up from his clipboard. "Can't inspect what I can't access." "But what if there's something wrong up there? Then it's the estate's problem, according to your contract." He tapped his pen against the clipboard. "Look, I've been doing this for 37 years. I've seen some weird stuff. Sealed rooms aren't that unusual. Usually it's hoarding. Sometimes it's mold remediation that wasn't done right. Occasionally it's asbestos they don't want to deal with. Whatever's up there, it's not your concern." But it was Emma's concern. It became more of a concern every day leading up to closing. She found herself researching Colonel Archibald Stone online, falling down rabbit holes at 2 in the morning while David slept. There wasn't much. A few military records that were heavily redacted. A newspaper clipping from 1973 about a commendation ceremony. A mention in a book about Cold War intelligence operations. Just his name in a footnote with the notation, "Classified operations, details unavailable." The man was a ghost who'd lived in that house for 70 years and put 3 locks on his attic door. Closing day was anticlimactic. They signed papers for an hour in a lawyer's office that smelled like old coffee and older leather. Patricia handed them the keys with her professional smile and a bottle of cheap champagne. "Congratulations on your new home." The keys were on a ring with a small brass tag engraved with the address. Emma counted them: front door, back door, basement, garage, and 3 smaller keys that looked like they belonged to padlocks. "What are these for?" she asked Patricia. The realtor's smile finally faltered completely. "I'm not sure. They were with the property keys from the estate. I assume they're for storage sheds or something." But Emma knew. She knew exactly what they were for. They moved in on a Saturday. The moving truck arrived at 8 in the morning, and by sunset they were surrounded by boxes in a house that felt too big and too empty and too full of someone else's history. David ordered pizza. They ate it sitting on the floor of the living room, their voices echoing off walls that had heard 70 years of other conversations, other lives. "It's going to be great," David said, tomato sauce on his chin, his eyes bright with the kind of optimism Emma loved and envied. 6 months of work and this place will be worth double what we paid. Emma nodded, but she was looking at the ceiling, thinking about the floor above them, and the floor above that, and the locked door at the end of the hallway. They slept on an air mattress that night. The bedroom was cold despite it being June, and Emma lay awake listening to the house settle around them. Old houses made noise. She knew that. Expansion and contraction, wood adjusting to temperature changes, pipes cooling down. But some of the sounds didn't sound like settling. Some of them sounded like footsteps. The first week passed in a blur of unpacking and planning. David took measurements and drew up renovation schedules. Emma arranged furniture and tried to make the house feel like theirs instead of Colonel Stone's. But the door was always there at the end of the second-floor hallway. 3 locks. Waiting. David noticed her staring at it on the 8th night. "You're obsessed," he said, not unkindly. "I'm curious." Curiosity killed the cat. Satisfaction brought it back. Emma turned to look at him. "Don't you want to know?" "Not particularly." David was scrolling through his phone, looking at kitchen cabinet options. "We got an amazing deal on this place specifically because we agreed not to open that door. Why would we violate that? Because it's our house now. It's our house with a legally binding contract that says we don't open that door." Emma knew he was right. She knew it was stupid to risk legal complications over curiosity, but the door was like an itch she couldn't scratch. It was there every time she walked down the hallway. 3 locks. What required 3 locks? She started having dreams about it. In the dreams, she had the keys. She'd unlock the first lock, then the second, then the third. The door would swing open, and there would be nothing, just an empty attic with dust and cobwebs and disappointment. But sometimes in the dreams, there was something else. A sound, a low hum, like machinery running, and a smell, that metallic smell she'd noticed on the first day, stronger now, almost like ozone. On the 10th night, Emma woke up at 3 in the morning with absolute certainty that she'd heard something from above. Not footsteps this time, something else. A sound like clicking, rhythmic and mechanical. She lay in the darkness listening. David's breathing was deep and even beside her. The house was silent except for the usual creaks and groans. And then she heard it again. Click, 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 coming from directly above their bedroom, from the attic. Emma sat up slowly, her heart hammering. She waited, counting her own breaths. 30 seconds, a minute. Click, click, click. She got out of bed, moving carefully to avoid waking David. The floor was cold under her bare feet. She moved to the bedroom door and out into the hallway, following the sound. The attic door was at the far end, barely visible in the darkness. Emma stood at the bottom of the short staircase that led up to it, looking up at those 3 locks. The clicking had stopped. She waited, but there was only silence now, the kind of silence that felt deliberate. like something on the other side was waiting too. Emma went back to bed, but she didn't sleep. If you believe every life holds a story worth remembering, subscribe to this channel and join our community. The clicking became a regular occurrence, always at night, always around 3 in the morning. Emma started keeping a notebook, documenting each time she heard it. The pattern was irregular but persistent. 3 nights in a row, then nothing for 2 nights, then back again. David didn't hear it. He slept through everything, the way he always had. Emma didn't tell him. She wasn't sure why. Maybe because she knew what he'd say. Old house, old pipes, expansion and contraction. But pipes didn't click in rhythm. 2 weeks after moving in, Emma was alone in the house during the day while David was at a job site. She was painting the downstairs bathroom, mindless work that let her thoughts wander, when she heard it again, the clicking, in the middle of the day. She set down the paint roller carefully, listening. It was definitely coming from above, steady and mechanical. Click, click, click. Emma walked out of the bathroom, through the kitchen, up the stairs. The sound got louder as she climbed. By the time she reached the second-floor hallway, it was unmistakable. She stood at the base of the attic stairs, looking up at the door. The clicking was clear now, not random, not pipes, something deliberate, something mechanical. Her hand went to her pocket, where she'd been carrying the 3 small keys since closing day. She'd told herself it was just to keep them safe. But she knew the truth. She'd been carrying them because part of her had always known she was going to use them. Emma climbed the stairs. 5 steps. The door was painted white, but up close she could see it was reinforced. The wood was thick, maybe 2 inches. The locks were heavy-duty, military grade. The clicking stopped. Emma stood with her hand on the first key, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. This was stupid. This was a violation of their contract. This could cost them the house. But the silence on the other side of the door was worse than the clicking. It felt expectant, waiting. She inserted the first key into the deadbolt. It turned smoothly, well-oiled despite decades of disuse. The bolt slid back with a solid thunk. The second key went into the padlock. It opened with a click that sounded too loud in the quiet hallway. The third key was for the sliding bolt. Emma's hand was shaking now. She could stop. She could lock everything back up and walk away and never think about this again. But she knew she wouldn't. The bolt slid back. Emma's hand was on the doorknob when she heard David's truck in the driveway. She froze, her heart stopping completely for one long moment. Then she was moving, locking the bolts back in place, her fingers fumbling with the keys. The padlock clicked shut. The deadbolt slid home. She was at the bottom of the attic stairs when she heard the front door open. "Em, you home?" "Upstairs." Her voice sounded normal. She was amazed by that. "Just finished the bathroom." David's footsteps on the stairs. He appeared at the top, smiling, carrying takeout bags. "Thought we could have lunch together. I've got 2 hours before I need to be back." They ate Thai food in the kitchen, and Emma laughed at David's stories about the job site. And the whole time she was thinking about the door, about how close she'd come, about how the clicking had stopped the moment she'd touched the first lock. Like something on the other side knew she was there. That night, there was no clicking. Emma lay awake until dawn, listening to silence. 3 days passed. No clicking. No sounds from above at all. Emma started to wonder if she'd imagined the whole thing. Stress from the move, anxiety about the renovation costs, her mind playing tricks. But on the 4th night, it came back. Louder this time, not just clicking. A sound like typing, rapid and rhythmic, like fingers on a keyboard. Emma got out of bed. David didn't stir. She walked to the hallway, and the sound was unmistakable now. Someone was typing. In their attic, in the middle of the night. She stood at the base of the attic stairs, listening to the impossible sound of fingers on keys, and something inside her snapped. The fear, the curiosity, the frustration of not knowing. It all crystallized into decision. She was going to open that door. Emma went back to the bedroom and got the keys from her nightstand. David was still sleeping, his face peaceful in the dim light from the street. She thought about waking him, thought about telling him what she was about to do. But she didn't. She walked back to the attic stairs and climbed them in the darkness. The typing continued, steady and unhurried. Emma unlocked the deadbolt, then the padlock, then the sliding bolt. Her hand was on the doorknob when the typing stopped. The silence was absolute. Not even the house was settling. It was like the entire building was holding its breath. Emma turned the knob. The door opened. The smell hit her first. That metallic scent she'd noticed on day one, but stronger now. Ozone and machine oil and something else. Something that reminded her of the science lab in high school. Electricity and dust and time. The attic was dark, but there was a glow. A faint green light coming from the far end of the space. Emma's hand found a light switch by the door and flipped it. Fluorescent lights flickered to life, and Emma's breath caught in her throat. The attic wasn't an attic. It was a command center. The space was maybe 30 feet long and 20 feet wide, with a sloped ceiling that followed the roof line. But instead of boxes and old furniture and the accumulated junk of a lifetime, there were desks. Multiple desks arranged in a U shape, facing the walls. And on the walls were maps, huge maps, covering every available surface. World maps, ocean maps, topographical maps. They were marked with pins and strings and notations in handwriting. So small, Emma couldn't read it from where she stood, but it was the equipment that made her legs go weak. The desks were covered in machinery. Radio equipment, she thought at first, but more sophisticated than any radio she'd ever seen. There were screens, not modern flat screens, but old CRT monitors, the kind from the 1980s. There were keyboards, mechanical and heavy. There were switches and dials and meters with needles that trembled behind glass. And all of it was on. The screens glowed with green text. The meters registered activity. A low hum filled the space. The sound of electricity running through circuits that should have been dead for decades. Emma took a step into the room, and motion sensor lights clicked on, flooding the space with harsh white light. She could see everything now. The maps were marked with coordinates. The strings connected pins in patterns that suggested routes or trajectories. There were dates written in the margins, some from the 1960s, others more recent, much more recent. One of the monitors was displaying text. Emma moved closer, her legs feeling disconnected from her body. The text was scrolling slowly, line by line, like someone was typing it in real time. Protocol Stone active, monitoring station Alpha 7, deep water surveillance, continuous operation since 1962. Emma's hand went to her mouth. She was reading the words, but they weren't making sense. Protocol Stone, monitoring station, 1962. Colonel Stone had been dead for 6 months. She moved to one of the maps. It was a detailed chart of the Atlantic Ocean, marked with dozens of red pins. Each pin had a notation beside it. Coordinates, dates, and abbreviations Emma didn't understand. But some of the words were clear enough. Submarine contact, unidentified vessel, Soviet signature, lost asset. Emma's eyes tracked across the map, and her blood went cold. Some of the pins were marked with recent dates. Not 1962, not even 1990. Last year, last month, last week. "Oh my God," she whispered. The equipment was still operational. After 60 years, after Colonel Stone's death, after the house had been sold and the attic sealed, the equipment was still running, still monitoring, still recording. Emma turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. There were filing cabinets along one wall, each drawer labelled with years and codes. There was a safe in the corner, military green, with a combination lock. There was a corkboard covered in photographs, black and white images of submarines, naval vessels, men in uniform. And in the centre of the main desk, there was a telephone. It was red, bright red, the colour of emergency equipment. It sat in the middle of the desk like a centrepiece, the handset resting in a cradle that looked like it had never been disturbed. Emma stared at it. She'd seen phones like that in movies, hotlines, direct connections to command centres and situation rooms, the kind of phone that only rang when something catastrophic was happening, the kind of phone that shouldn't exist in a dead man's attic. She was backing toward the door, her mind racing, trying to process what she was seeing, when the phone rang. The sound was shrill and mechanical, cutting through the hum of the equipment like a knife. Emma jumped, her heart slamming against her ribs. The phone rang again, and again. She should leave. She should run downstairs and wake David and get out of this house and call someone. The police, the military, someone who would know what to do with a Cold War command centre that was still operational in a dead veteran's attic. But her feet carried her forward instead, toward the desk, toward the phone. It rang a fourth time. Emma picked it up. Static at first, then a voice. Male, clipped, professional. The kind of voice that was used to giving orders and being obeyed. Identification code. Emma's mouth was dry. I don't. Identification code required. You have 5 seconds. I don't know any code. Protocol Stone has been violated. The voice was emotionless, stating a fact. Unauthorized access detected. You have 60 seconds to evacuate the premises. This is your only warning. Wait, what? Who is this? 55 seconds. I own this house. I'm the 50 seconds. Evacuation is mandatory. This facility is classified. Unauthorized personnel must clear the area immediately. Emma's hand was shaking so hard, she almost dropped the phone. What happens in 50 seconds? 45 seconds. Containment protocol will be initiated. Leave now. The line went dead. Emma stood frozen for one precious second, the dial tone buzzing in her ear. Then her brain caught up with her body, and she was moving. She dropped the phone and ran for the door, her feet tangling in the carpet, her shoulder hitting the door frame. She was down the attic stairs in 3 steps, her ankle twisting but holding. The hallway was dark, but she knew the way. She was at the bedroom door, slamming it open, and David was sitting up in bed, confused and half asleep. Em? What? Get up! Now! We have to leave! What are you? Now, David! Something in her voice cut through his confusion. He was out of bed, grabbing his jeans from the chair, not asking questions. Emma was already moving, running down the stairs, her bare feet slapping against the hardwood. She hit the front door and yanked it open. The night air was cool and clean, and she was on the porch, down the steps on the sidewalk. David was behind her, hopping on one foot as he pulled on his shoes. Emma, what the hell is going on? She was counting in her head. How long had it been? 30 seconds. 40. She grabbed David's arm and pulled him further from the house, across the street, behind their truck. Em, you're scaring me. What? Just wait. They waited. 30 seconds. A minute. Nothing happened. The house stood silent and dark, exactly as they'd left it. No explosion. No containment protocol, whatever that meant. Just a Victorian house on a quiet street in the middle of the night. David was staring at her. Are you going to tell me what's happening? Emma opened her mouth to answer, but she didn't know where to start. The attic, the equipment, the maps, the phone. It all sounded insane. It all was insane. "I opened the attic," she said finally. David's expression went from concerned to angry in half a second. "You what?" I know we weren't supposed to, but I heard sounds and I had to know." "What sounds?" "Emma, what the hell did you do?" She was about to answer when she saw the car. It came around the corner at the end of the street, moving slowly. No headlights. A black sedan, the kind that looked like every other sedan except for the way it moved. Deliberately, purposefully, it pulled up in front of their house and stopped. 2 men got out. They were wearing suits, dark suits, even though it was 3 in the morning. They moved with the kind of precision that suggested military training. One of them looked up and down the street, his gaze passing over Emma and David without seeming to register them. The other walked up to the front door of their house. He didn't knock. He used a key. Emma and David watched from behind the truck as the men entered their house. Lights came on inside. First floor, then second floor, then the attic. "Who are they?" David whispered. Emma shook her head. She didn't know, but she could guess. More cars arrived. 3 more black sedans, then a van. Men in suits and men in what looked like hazmat gear. They moved in and out of the house with the efficiency of people who'd done this before, carrying equipment, carrying boxes, carrying out the contents of the attic. A police car arrived, but the officer who got out didn't act like a cop. He talked to one of the suited men, nodded, and then got back in his car and parked at the end of the street, blocking access. "This isn't happening," David said. His voice was hollow. "This isn't real." But it was real. They watched for 2 hours as their house was systematically emptied of Colonel Stone's secrets. The maps, the equipment, the filing cabinets, all of it loaded into the van and driven away. As the sun started to rise, a different car arrived. This one was grey, and the woman who got out was wearing a pantsuit and carrying a briefcase. She walked up to where Emma and David were still crouched behind their truck, her heels clicking on the asphalt. "Mr. and Mrs. Harrison." It wasn't a question. "I'm Agent Sarah Chen with the Department of Defense. We need to talk." They sat in the back of Agent Chen's car while she explained things that didn't make sense and couldn't be true, but obviously were. Colonel Archibald Stone had been part of a classified program during the Cold War. Deep water surveillance, tracking Soviet submarines, monitoring for lost nuclear assets. The program had officially ended in 1991 when the Soviet Union collapsed. Officially, Colonel Stone continued his work, Agent Chen said. Her voice was matter-of-fact, like she was discussing a weather report. Without authorization. For 34 years after the program ended, he maintained his monitoring station. We didn't know until after his death, when his lawyer contacted us about the sealed attic clause in his will. "You knew," Emma's voice was hoarse. "You knew what was up there, and you still sold us this house?" "The estate sale was handled through intermediaries. We were in the process of securing the property when you made your offer. The sealed attic clause was meant to buy us time." Agent Chen looked at Emma with something that might have been sympathy. "You weren't supposed to open it. There was equipment running," Emma said. "Current equipment, recent dates on the maps." Agent Chen was quiet for a moment. Then, Colonel Stone was monitoring for specific assets. Submarines that went missing during the Cold War. Some of them carried nuclear weapons. Some of them are still out there, somewhere on the ocean floor. The Colonel believed he could find them. "Could he?" David asked. "That's classified." Agent Chen opened her briefcase and pulled out a folder. "This is a non-disclosure agreement. You'll sign it, and you'll never speak about what you saw in that attic. To anyone. Ever." "And if we don't?" Emma asked. "Then we'll have a very different conversation." one that involves national security violations and federal prison. Agent Chen's expression didn't change. But I don't think it will come to that. You seem like reasonable people who made a mistake. They signed the papers. Agent Chen handed them a business card. You'll be contacted by a gas company representative later today. There was a leak. That's the official story. The house will need to be vacated for repairs. You'll be compensated for your trouble and relocated to temporary housing. The repairs will take approximately 6 weeks. And then what? David asked. And then you move back into your house. The attic will be empty. The equipment will be gone. And you'll never speak of this again. Agent Chen closed her briefcase. Colonel Stone spent his entire life protecting secrets. Some of those secrets are still protecting us. I suggest you let them stay buried. She got out of the car and walked away, leaving Emma and David sitting in the back seat as the sun rose over their house that wasn't really theirs anymore. The gas company representative arrived at 9. He was apologetic and professional and completely believable. There had been a leak in the old pipes. Very dangerous. They were lucky no one was hurt. The house would need extensive repairs. Emma and David packed bags and moved into a hotel. The house was cordoned off with yellow tape and official-looking signs. Neighbors came by to ask what happened, and Emma told them about the gas leak, and they nodded sympathetically and said old houses were always trouble. 6 weeks later, they moved back in. The attic was empty, just bare wood and dust and cobwebs, exactly what an attic should be. The 3 locks were gone. The door was just a door now. They never talked about what happened. Not to each other, not to anyone. Emma sometimes woke up at 3 in the morning, listening for clicking that never came. David threw himself into renovations with an intensity that suggested he was trying to erase every trace of Colonel Stone from the house. But some nights when Emma was alone, she'd climb the stairs to the attic and stand in the empty space, remembering the maps and the equipment and the phone call that had saved their lives. She'd think about Colonel Stone, living in this house for 70 years, climbing these stairs every night to monitor for threats that might never come, protecting secrets that might never matter, doing his duty long after anyone asked him to. The world had forgotten him. The military had moved on, but he'd kept watching, kept listening, kept his post until the day he died. Emma found his obituary online one night. It was short. Colonel Archibald Stone, 94, died peacefully at home, survived by no immediate family. Private burial at Arlington National Cemetery. No mention of his service, no details about his life, just a name and a date and a quiet exit. But Emma knew the truth. Colonel Stone hadn't died peacefully. He died at his post, monitoring for submarines that might still be out there, protecting secrets that might still matter. He'd been a soldier until the end, and even in death, he'd kept his secrets. The house was theirs now, really theirs. But sometimes Emma felt like they were just caretakers, guardians of a space that had held something important, something that mattered. She never regretted opening the door, even though it had cost them 6 weeks of their lives and given her nightmares. She'd never fully shake, because now she knew. She knew that there were people like Colonel Stone in the world, people who did their duty without recognition or reward, people who kept watching long after everyone else looked away, people who protected the rest of us from threats we'd never know about. The house stood at the end of Maple Grove like a monument to another century. 3 stories of Victorian elegance, wrapped in fresh paint, the colour of morning clouds. The for sale sign was long gone, replaced by a mailbox with Harrison painted on the side. And in the empty attic, if you listened very carefully on quiet nights, you could almost hear the ghost of machinery humming, the echo of a soldier who never left his post, still watching, still protecting, still keeping his oath. The compensation check from the Department of Defense arrived 3 weeks after they moved back in. It was delivered by courier, requiring a signature, and the amount was enough to cover 6 months of mortgage payments plus the hotel costs. There was no letter of explanation, no official letterhead, just a check from an account number that probably didn't exist in any public database. David deposited it without comment. They used the money to update the electrical system, just like the inspector had recommended. Life moved forward with the deliberate normalcy of people trying very hard not to think about what they'd seen. But Emma couldn't stop thinking about it. She found herself researching Cold War submarine incidents, lost vessels, classified operations. There were more than she'd imagined. Soviet submarines that had vanished in the 1960s and 70s, their locations still unknown. American vessels that had gone down in deep water, taking their nuclear payloads with them. Accidents that had been covered up. Incidents that had almost started wars. And somewhere on the ocean floor, those submarines were still out there, slowly corroding, their nuclear material leaking into the water. Time bombs that might not go off for 100 years, or might contaminate entire ecosystems tomorrow. Colonel Stone had been looking for them. For 34 years after his program ended, he'd kept searching, monitoring, tracking, trying to find the lost weapons before someone else did. Emma wondered how many he'd found. She wondered if anyone had listened to him. She wondered if the maps and coordinates that had been carried out of her attic in the middle of the night were being used right now by people who would never acknowledge where the information came from. She wondered if Colonel Stone had died knowing his work mattered, or if he died thinking he'd wasted his life chasing ghosts in the deep water. The first letter arrived 2 months after they moved back in. It was addressed to the current residents and had no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a handwritten note. "Thank you for your discretion. The Colonel would have appreciated it. A friend." Emma showed it to David. He read it once, then put it in the kitchen drawer where they kept takeout menus and batteries and other things that didn't have a proper place. "We're not doing this," he said. "We signed an NDA. We're moving on." But the letters kept coming. One every few weeks, always handwritten, always brief, always thanking them for their discretion, or mentioning something oblique about the Colonel's service. The work continues in his name. 3 assets located using his data. He was right about the Barents Sea. Emma kept them in a shoebox in her closet. She didn't know why. Maybe because they were proof that what happened had been real. Maybe because they suggested that Colonel Stone's work had mattered after all. Or maybe because they reminded her that there were still people out there doing the work that no one else wanted to do. Watching for threats in the deep water. Protecting secrets that kept the world safe. David pretended the letters didn't exist. He focused on the renovations with an intensity that bordered on obsession. The kitchen was gutted and rebuilt. The bathrooms were modernized. The exterior was repainted. Every trace of Colonel Stone's aesthetic was systematically erased and replaced with something clean and contemporary. Emma let him do it. She understood. He was trying to make the house theirs, trying to overwrite the history that had come before. But history doesn't erase that easily. The first anniversary of moving in came and went. The house was transformed, unrecognizable from the decrepit Victorian they'd first toured. David's contracting skills had turned it into something from a magazine spread. Clean lines, modern fixtures, open floor plan. They hosted a housewarming party. Friends and family came and admired the renovations and drank wine and said all the right things about how beautiful the place was. Emma smiled and accepted compliments and gave tours, carefully avoiding the attic. Not that there was anything to see up there anymore, just empty space, just dust and cobwebs and the ghost of machinery that had hummed for 60 years. but she felt it. Every time someone asked about the third floor, every time the conversation turned to the house's history, she felt the weight of the secret pressing down on her. The NDA she'd signed, the knowledge she carried. Colonel Stone had lived in this house for 70 years, and no one at the party knew his name. No one knew what he'd done. No one knew that the attic above their heads had once been a classified monitoring station tracking nuclear submarines in the deep water. They knew nothing, and Emma couldn't tell them. The party ended at midnight. David was drunk and happy, talking about property values and resale potential. Emma cleaned up alone, loading the dishwasher and thinking about secrets and the weight of carrying them. She was taking out the trash when she saw the car. It was parked across the street. A dark sedan, engine running, no headlights. Emma froze on the front porch, a garbage bag in her hand, staring at the vehicle. The driver's side door opened. A man got out. He was older, maybe 60, with grey hair and the kind of posture that suggested military service. He looked at Emma for a long moment, then nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement or respect. Then he got back in the car and drove away. Emma stood on the porch for 10 minutes after the car disappeared, her heart pounding, the garbage bag forgotten at her feet. She didn't know who the man was. She didn't know if he'd been at the party or if he'd just been watching the house, but she knew what the nod meant. They were still watching, still monitoring, still keeping track of the house where Colonel Stone had kept his secrets. She went back inside and locked the door, and didn't mention it to David. Winter came. The house was warm and comfortable, the new HVAC system working perfectly. Snow fell on Maple Grove, covering the street in white, making everything look clean and new. Emma got a job at a local architecture firm. David's contracting business was booming. They fell into routines, work and dinner and television and sleep. Normal life, the kind of life they'd wanted when they bought the house. But Emma couldn't shake the feeling that they were living on borrowed time, that the secrets in the attic hadn't really gone away. They'd just been moved somewhere else. And someday, someone would come back for them. The letters kept arriving, less frequently now, but still regular enough to remind her that Colonel Stone's work was ongoing. 2 more assets secured. The Pacific data was invaluable. He saved more lives than he'll ever know. Emma started researching the Colonel more seriously. She used her lunch breaks to dig through online archives and declassified documents. She found mentions of his service in Korea and Vietnam, commendations for bravery, citations for classified operations. But there was a gap, a 15-year period from 1962 to 1977, where there was no public record of what he'd done, no duty stations, no deployments, just blank space in his service record. Those were the years he'd been running the monitoring station, the years he'd been tracking Soviet submarines and lost nuclear assets, the years that were still classified. Emma found a photograph from 1965. Colonel Stone receiving a medal from a general whose name had been redacted from the caption. The colonel was young in the photo, maybe 40, with dark hair and a serious expression. He was standing at attention, his uniform crisp, his eyes focused on something beyond the camera. Emma stared at that photograph for a long time, trying to reconcile the young soldier with the old man who died alone in this house, trying to imagine the weight of carrying secrets for 60 years, trying to understand what kind of person does that. What kind of person keeps working long after everyone else has forgotten, long after the mission is officially over, long after anyone is paying attention? A true believer, she thought, or a man who couldn't let go, or maybe just someone who understood that some threats don't end just because the war does. Spring arrived. The snow melted and the trees on Maple Grove budded green. Emma planted flowers in the front yard, trying to make the house feel more like home. David talked about putting in a deck in the backyard. Life was good, normal, exactly what they'd wanted. And then Agent Chen came back. She arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, driving the same grey sedan, wearing the same professional pantsuit. Emma was in the front yard, pulling weeds when the car pulled up. Her stomach dropped. Agent Chen got out and walked up the driveway, her heels clicking on the concrete. She wasn't smiling. "Mrs. Harrison, we need to talk." They sat in the living room. Agent Chen declined coffee. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a folder, setting it on the coffee table between them. "I'm here because we have a situation," she said, "and unfortunately, you're involved." Emma's mouth went dry. "We haven't talked to anyone. We signed the NDA. We've kept our word." "I know. This isn't about that." Agent Chen opened the folder. Inside were photographs. Satellite images, Emma realized. Ocean floor topography. 3 weeks ago, a Russian research vessel was detected operating in the North Atlantic. They were using deep-sea submersibles to search a specific area, an area that corresponds to coordinates found in Colonel Stone's files. Emma stared at the images. "I don't understand. How would they know?" "We don't know. But someone leaked information about the Colonel's work. Someone who knew what was in that attic." Agent Chen's eyes were hard. "We've ruled out everyone on our end, which means the leak came from somewhere else." "You think it was us?" Emma's voice was flat. "I think someone has been watching this house. Someone who knows what used to be here." Agent Chen pulled out another photograph. This one showed Emma's house, taken from across the street, at night. "This was taken 2 weeks ago by our surveillance team. Do you see the car in the background?" Emma looked. There was a dark sedan parked down the street. "Is that Russian intelligence? They've had this house under observation for the past 6 months." Agent Chen closed the folder. "They're looking for something. We need to know what." "There's nothing here. You took everything." "We took everything from the attic. But Colonel Stone lived in this house for 70 years. If he had other files, other hiding places." Agent Chen looked around the room. "We need to search the property, thoroughly." Emma felt like the floor was dropping out from under her. "You want to tear apart our house?" "I want to make sure there's nothing here that could compromise national security." The Colonel was brilliant, but he was also paranoid. He might have hidden backups, copies of his data, insurance policies. Agent Chen's expression softened slightly. "I know this is difficult, but if the Russians think there's something here worth finding, we need to find it first. If you believe every life holds a story worth remembering, subscribe to this channel and join our community." The search took 3 days. Teams of specialists went through every inch of the house. They used ground-penetrating radar in the basement. They pulled up floorboards. They checked behind walls. They dismantled the HVAC system and crawled through the ductwork. Emma and David stayed in a hotel again. Different hotel, same situation. Sitting in a generic room watching cable news and not talking about the fact that their lives had been upended again by a dead man's secrets. On the 3rd day, Agent Chen called. "We found something." They met at the house. The search teams were packing up their equipment, loading vans with tools and sensors. Agent Chen was waiting in the basement, standing next to the old furnace that David had been planning to replace. "The furnace has a false bottom," she said, "very well concealed. We almost missed it." She showed them. The base of the furnace had been modified, creating a hidden compartment about 2 feet square. Inside were 3 waterproof cases. Agent Chen opened the first case. Inside were notebooks, dozens of them, filled with handwriting so small it was almost illegible. Coordinates, dates, observations. 60 years of data, meticulously recorded. The second case contained maps, not the large wall maps from the attic, but detailed charts of specific ocean regions, each one marked with notations and calculations. The third case was different. Inside were letters, hundreds of them, bundled with rubber bands, organized by date. Agent Chen picked up one of the bundles and read the return address. Her expression changed. These are from other members of his unit. The original monitoring program. She flipped through the letters quickly. They kept in touch. After the program ended, they kept sharing information, comparing notes, continuing the work on their own. How many? Emma asked. At least a dozen, based on these addresses. Agent Chen looked up. Colonel Stone wasn't working alone. There was a whole network of them. Veterans who couldn't let go, who kept watching the deep water long after anyone asked them to. She put the letters back in the case and closed it. This is exactly what the Russians were looking for. Names and addresses of other monitoring stations, other sources of data. What happens now? David asked. Now we contact everyone on this list. We secure their materials. We make sure this network is completely shut down. Agent Chen picked up the cases. And we make sure the Russians know there's nothing left to find here. She looked at Emma and David. I'm sorry. I know you just wanted a house. You didn't ask for any of this. Will it be over? Emma asked. After this? Agent Chen was quiet for a moment. Then, the Colonel spent his entire life chasing submarines that went down 60 years ago. Some of them are still out there, still leaking radiation, still waiting to be found. She headed for the stairs. It's never really over, Mrs. Harrison. We just do our best to stay ahead of it. The surveillance on their house ended 2 weeks later. The Russian research vessel left the North Atlantic. Agent Chen called to say that the situation was resolved. The network had been secured, and they could finally move on with their lives. Emma didn't believe her. She'd learned enough about Colonel Stone to know that men like him always had contingencies, always had backup plans. The notebooks and maps in the furnace had been too easy to find, too obvious. If the Colonel had really wanted to hide something, he would have done better. Emma started searching the house on her own, not with ground-penetrating radar or thermal imaging, just her eyes and her hands and her growing understanding of how the Colonel's mind worked. She found the first clue in the library, a book on naval history, published in 1963. Inside the front cover was an inscription, "To Archie, who sees what others miss, MC." Emma flipped through the book. Certain passages were underlined. Certain page numbers had tiny marks in the margins. It looked random at first, but when she wrote down the page numbers in sequence, they formed coordinates. Coordinates that weren't in any of the notebooks from the furnace. She found the second clue in the garage, an old toolbox that had belonged to the Colonel, left behind because it looked like junk. But the bottom of the toolbox had a false panel, and under that panel was a USB drive. A USB drive in a house where everything else was analog, where the newest technology was from the 1980s. Emma plugged it into her laptop. The drive was encrypted, but the password prompt had a hint, where it all began. She tried Korea. No. Vietnam. No. 1962. No. Then she remembered the photograph she'd found online. The Colonel receiving a medal in 1965. The general whose name had been redacted. She tried Arlington. The drive unlocked. Inside was a single file, a video dated 6 months ago, 2 weeks before Colonel Stone died. Emma's hand was shaking as she clicked play. The video showed the attic, the command center fully operational, exactly as Emma had seen it that night. And sitting at the main desk, looking directly at the camera, was Colonel Archibald Stone. He was old in the video, ancient. His face was lined and his hands trembled slightly, but his eyes were sharp, alert, the eyes of someone who was still on duty. "If you're watching this," he said, his voice rough but clear, "then I'm dead. And you're probably the new owner of this house, and you probably opened the attic despite the contract clause telling you not to." Emma's breath caught. "I don't blame you," the colonel continued. "I would have done the same thing. Curiosity is a survival trait. The people who don't ask questions are the ones who get blindsided." He leaned forward slightly, his hands folded on the desk. "By now, you've probably been visited by people from the Department of Defense. They've probably told you that my work was unauthorized, that I was a relic of the Cold War who couldn't let go, that the program ended in 1991 and everything I did after that was the obsession of an old man who didn't know when to quit." The colonel smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. "They're wrong." He reached off camera and pulled something into view, a map, one of the ocean charts, marked with red pins. "These are the locations of nuclear submarines that went down during the Cold War, American and Soviet. Most people think there are maybe a dozen lost vessels. The official count is classified, but it's higher than that. Much higher." He pointed to one of the pins. "This one went down in 1968. K-129, Soviet Gulf II class submarine, carried 3 nuclear missiles. The CIA tried to recover it in 1974 with the Hughes Glomar Explorer. They got part of it. The rest is still down there, 2 miles deep, slowly corroding." Another pin. "This one is American. USS Scorpion, lost in 1968. 99 men. 2 nuclear torpedoes. Still on the ocean floor near the Azores." He pointed to a third pin. "This one isn't in any official record. It went down in 1971. Soviet Yankee-class submarine. 16 nuclear missiles. It was supposed to be decommissioned, but it was secretly kept in service for a black operation that went wrong. The Soviets never acknowledged it existed. We never acknowledged we knew about it. And it's still down there, in the Arctic Ocean, with enough nuclear material to contaminate the entire North Atlantic." The colonel's expression was grim. "There are 17 submarines on this map. 17 vessels carrying nuclear weapons that are slowly leaking radiation into the ocean. Some of them are in international waters. Some are in territorial waters of countries that don't know they're there. And some are in areas where terrorist organizations or hostile nations could potentially recover them." He leaned back in his chair. "The monitoring program was shut down in 1991 because the Cold War was over, because the threat was supposedly gone. But nuclear submarines don't care about politics. They don't care that the Soviet Union collapsed. They're still down there, still dangerous, still waiting." The colonel looked directly at the camera. "I kept working because someone had to, because the government decided it was too expensive to keep tracking these vessels, because they thought the risk was acceptable. But I've spent 60 years studying the ocean floor, and I'm telling you, the risk is not acceptable." He pulled out another map. This one showed the North Atlantic with a series of red circles. "These are projected contamination zones if the submarines breach completely. We're talking about radiation levels that would make entire fishing grounds unusable, ocean currents that would carry contamination to coastal areas, ecological disasters that would take centuries to remediate." The colonel's hands were steady now. His voice was firm. "I found 12 of the 17 submarines. I tracked them. I monitored their deterioration. I provided data to the government about which ones were most critical, and they did nothing. They classified my reports and filed them away and told me to stop wasting their time." He smiled again, that same grim smile. "So I kept working, and I kept copies of everything. Insurance policies, as they say, because I knew that someday someone would need this information. Someone who would actually do something about it. The colonel reached off camera again and held up a small object. A key. There's one more hiding place in this house. One place they won't find. One place where I've stored the complete data set. Every coordinate. Every calculation. Every piece of evidence about what's down there and what needs to be done. He set the key on the desk. If you're watching this, you have a choice. You can turn this video over to the Department of Defense and let them bury it like they buried everything else. Or you can use the key, find the data, and make sure it gets to someone who will actually do something about it. The colonel stood up slowly, his movements stiff with age. I'm an old man. I've done what I could, but the work isn't finished. It won't be finished in my lifetime, maybe not in yours either. But someone has to keep watching. Someone has to remember that these threats don't go away just because we stop paying attention. He walked toward the camera. His face filled the screen. The key opens a safe deposit box at First National Bank downtown. Box 1962. The data is there, all of it. What you do with it is up to you. The colonel reached for the camera. Good luck, and thank you for opening the attic. Curiosity might have killed the cat, but it's also what keeps the rest of us alive. The video ended. Emma sat in silence, staring at the blank screen. Her mind was racing. The key, the safe deposit box, the complete data set. Colonel Stone hadn't given up his secrets. He'd just been waiting for the right person to find them. She looked at the USB drive in her hand. She could destroy it, delete the video, pretend she'd never seen it, turn it over to Agent Chen and let the government handle it. Or she could use the key. Emma didn't tell David about the video. She didn't tell anyone. She spent 3 days thinking about it. 3 days weighing the choice the colonel had given her. On the 4th day, she went to First National Bank. The safe deposit box was exactly where the colonel said it would be. Box 1962. The key fit perfectly. Inside was a hard drive, just a single external hard drive, small enough to fit in her purse. Emma took it home and plugged it into her laptop. The drive contained thousands of files, spreadsheets, maps, photographs, sonar data, radiation readings, 60 years of research, meticulously organized and documented, and a text file labeled "Read Me First." Emma opened it. If you're reading this, you've made your choice. You've decided that the truth matters more than convenience, that some secrets are too dangerous to keep. The data on this drive represents the most complete survey of lost nuclear submarines ever compiled. It includes locations, contamination projections, and recovery recommendations. It's worth billions of dollars to the right buyer. Or it's worth nothing to someone who just wants to do the right thing. I'm betting you're the second type. Here's what you need to do. Make copies. Multiple copies. Store them in different locations. If one is destroyed or confiscated, the others that survive. Contact the people on the attached list. They're journalists, scientists, environmental organizations. People who can't be silenced or bought off. Give them the data. Let them verify it independently. Go public. Not all at once. Not in a way that gets you arrested for violating national security, but slowly, strategically. Make sure the information gets out there. Make sure people know what's at stake. Be careful. The government will try to stop you. Other interested parties will try to stop you. You'll be threatened. You'll be offered money to stay quiet. You'll be told you're endangering national security. You're not. You're protecting it. Because the real threat isn't people knowing about these submarines. The real threat is people forgetting about them. I've spent my entire life watching the deep water. Now it's your turn. Don't let them bury this. Don't let them forget. Keep watching. Colonel Archibald Stone. Emma read the message 3 times. Then she started making copies. The first article appeared 6 weeks later, a small environmental website running a story about unacknowledged nuclear contamination in the North Atlantic. It cited anonymous sources and classified documents. It included coordinates and radiation readings. The government issued a denial within hours. The story was false. The documents were fabricated. There was no threat to public safety. But the story didn't die. Other outlets picked it up. Scientists started asking questions. Environmental groups demanded investigations. The coordinates were verified by independent researchers using publicly available sonar data. The second article appeared in a major newspaper. This one was more detailed. It named specific submarines. It included photographs from Colonel Stone's files. It quoted experts who confirmed that the threat was real and had been ignored for decades. The government response was stronger this time. National security concerns, classified information, ongoing investigations. But they couldn't deny the evidence. Too many people had seen it. Too many copies were in circulation. By the third month, it was international news. The United Nations was involved. Environmental agencies were demanding action. Countries were arguing about jurisdiction and responsibility. And in a house at the end of Maple Grove, Emma Harrison watched the news and thought about an old man who'd spent his life watching the deep water, who'd kept working long after everyone else had given up, who'd protected his secrets until he could find someone to carry them forward. She thought about the choice he'd given her, the burden he'd passed on, and she thought about the submarines still down there in the darkness, still leaking, still waiting. The work wasn't finished. It wouldn't be finished in her lifetime, maybe not ever. But someone was watching now. Someone was paying attention. And that, Emma thought, was what Colonel Stone had been fighting for all along. Not recognition, not glory, just the simple knowledge that someone would remember. Someone would care. Someone would keep watching. Agent Chen came back one more time. She arrived without warning, her expression carefully neutral. Emma invited her in, offered coffee, and waited. "You know what you've done," Chen said. "It wasn't a question. I know what I had to do. You violated the NDA. You released classified information. You've compromised ongoing operations." Chen's voice was flat, professional. "I could have you arrested right now." "But you won't," Emma said. Chen was quiet for a long moment. Then, "No, I won't, because you were right." She set her briefcase on the coffee table and opened it. Inside were documents, official-looking papers with government seals. "The Colonel's data has been verified. The threat is real, and because of your leak, we can't ignore it anymore. The President has authorized a joint task force to locate and secure the most critical sites. It's going to cost billions of dollars and take decades, but it's happening." Chen closed the briefcase. "The Colonel tried to tell us for 30 years. We didn't listen. You made us listen. So I'm not going to prison. You're not going to prison. But you're also not going to take credit. Officially, this never happened. The data came from other sources. You were never involved." Chen stood up. "That's the deal. You stay silent and we do the work." Emma thought about it. Thought about Colonel Stone, who'd worked in secret his entire life, who'd never asked for recognition, who'd just done his duty and trusted that someday it would matter. "That's acceptable," she said. Chen nodded. She walked to the door, then paused. "The Colonel would be proud of you. He spent his life looking for someone who would understand, someone who would carry it forward. He found that person." She left without another word. Emma stood in the doorway, watching the grey sedan drive away. Then she went back inside, to the house that had belonged to Colonel Stone. The house that was hers now, but would always carry his legacy. She climbed the stairs to the attic. The empty attic with its bare walls and dust and silence. But if she listened carefully, she could still hear it, the ghost of machinery humming, the echo of a soldier who never left his post, still watching, still protecting, still keeping his oath. And now Emma realized she was keeping it too. The work wasn't finished. It would never be finished. But someone was watching. Someone remembered. And in the deep water, the submarines waited, slowly corroding, slowly leaking their poison into the ocean, but not forgotten anymore, not ignored, because an old man had refused to give up, had refused to let the world forget, had protected his secrets until he could find someone to carry them forward. And a woman who just wanted a house had found herself carrying the weight of those secrets, the burden of that duty, the honor of that trust. Emma stood in the empty attic and made a promise to the ghost of Colonel Archibald Stone. She would keep watching. She would keep remembering. She would keep his oath. Because some duties don't end when the uniform comes off. Some battles don't end when the war is over. Some soldiers keep fighting long after everyone else has gone home. And some secrets are worth protecting, worth carrying, worth passing on to the next person who's willing to bear the weight. The house stood at the end of Maple Grove, like a monument to duty, to sacrifice, to the quiet heroism of people who do what needs to be done, even when no one is watching, especially when no one is watching, because that's when it matters most. Emma turned off the attic light and went back downstairs. David was in the kitchen, making dinner, talking about his day, normal life, the life they'd wanted. But Emma carried something else now, a secret, a duty, a promise to a dead soldier who'd trusted her with his life's work. She would keep that promise. She would keep watching the deep water. And someday, when she was old and the work was still unfinished, she would find someone else, someone who would understand, someone who would carry it forward, because that's what soldiers do. They pass the torch. They keep the watch. They never abandon their post, even after death, especially after death. The colonel had taught her that, and Emma would never forget. If you believe every life holds a story worth remembering, subscribe to this channel and join our community.